Hello students, welcome to Akshara 8 Foundation. Myself I am Shiv Shankar, I am a physics teacher. So today we are going to start a new chapter. In the last class we have completed screw gauge, we have completed there. So now today we are going to learn a new chapter, that is the vectors. Okay. So vectors, it is basically a mathematical concept. It's a basic mathematics concept for the physics there. In our coming chapters, in many chapters we are going to use this vectors concepts. So it is very important, that is the reason why. So now we'll see the vectors there. Actually in our physics there are many physical quantities are there. So that all the physical quantities are classified into several types there, okay, based on their magnitude and their direction there, and the properties of this mechanical, this mathematical laws, okay. So they are those are called as, like some of the, all the physical quantities are said to be the scalar physical quantities and other physical quantities are vector physical quantities, okay. So now here we are going to see about the vectors. So then what is a vector actually? So vector is nothing but the physical quantity which has both magnitude and direction is called vectors. So while we have discussed um, in some of the quantities, we have said that this is a vector quantity, this is a scalar quantity, we have said that, okay. So the vector is nothing but which has both magnitude and direction. So that is a vector physical quantities. So now here vector physical quantities and scalar physical quantities. See here the vectors are nothing but the physical quantity which have both magnitude and direction. The physical quantities both having magnitude and direction. The physical quantities which have both magnitude and direction there. Both magnitude and direction. The physical quantities which have both magnitude and direction, they are said to be the vectors, and here only they have magnitude, no direction. Magnitude and no direction. No direction is called the scalars there. Like here we can see the examples, like here displacement is a vector quantity. Displacement. So examples we can say there, vector physical quantities. Displacement is a vector physical quantity, and next we can write here velocity. Velocity is a vector physical quantity. We can write here acceleration. Acceleration is also a vector physical quantity. So now, so force, like there are many physical quantities are there, etc. Okay, these are the vector physical quantities. Okay, so now here scalars we can write here mass. Mass is a scalar physical quantity. Then time is also scalar physical quantity. Okay, density, area, volume. Okay, then we can write here pressure, power, energy. These are all the physical quantities which we are going to use in our topics. Okay, so now like this, all the physical quantities, some are classified as the scalar physical quantities and other are classified as the vector physical quantities. The vectors are nothing but the physical quantities which have both magnitude and direction. They are said to be the vectors physical quantities, and the physical quantity which have only the magnitude, no direction, they are said to be the scalar physical quantities. Okay. So now we'll see there are different types of the vectors. There are the different types of the vectors there that we are going to see here. Okay. So what are the types of vectors we are going to learn here, that we'll see there. Okay, types of vectors. Now it is clear now, vectors is nothing but the physical quantity which has both magnitude and direction. The physical quantity which has only the magnitude, then it is said to be the scalar. Okay. So we'll see the types of vectors. There are different types of vectors are there. We will discuss them. So types of vectors. Types of vectors. So first one we have the like vectors. Okay, like vectors. Like vectors. And second one we have unlike vectors. Unlike vectors. And third one parallel vectors. Parallel vectors. Fourth one anti-parallel vectors or unparallel vectors. Unparallel vectors, or we can say anti-parallel vectors. Anti-parallel vectors. And fifth one we can say their unit vector. Unit vector. Okay, negative vector. Next one we have the negative vector. Negative vector. Negative vector. And seventh one we have the proper vector. Proper vector. The eighth one is a position vector. Position vector. So ninth one we have equal vector. Equal vectors. And still we have 10th one is collinear vectors. Collinear vectors. 11th one is coplanar vectors. Coplanar vectors. Okay, 12th one null vector. Null vector. Null vector. So like we have the orthogonal vectors. Orthogonal vectors. So like we have the one-dimensional vectors and two-dimensional vectors. Okay, three-dimensional vectors will be have. So these are the basic types of the vectors. Okay. So now we'll see there what are the like vectors. The vectors which have same in the direction. The vector which has same in the direction. The vector which has the same direction, they are said to be the like vector. Suppose let us consider here the vector is like this. It may be like this. There is no matter how the direction may be there. Or we can say like this also, the vectors which are in the same direction, they are said to be the like vectors. The magnitude may be equal or different. But the vector which are in the same direction are said to be the like vectors. And unlike vectors are the vectors which are may be different in magnitude, but they are in the different directions there. The vectors which are in the different directions, they are said to be the unlike vectors, like that. So they are said to be the unlike vectors. If the vectors are in the same direction, they are said to be the like vectors. And the vector which are in the same magnitude may be equal or may not be equal, but they are in the different direction, they are said to be the unlike vectors. And parallel vectors means the vectors which are parallel to each other. The vectors which are parallel to each other, they may be in the same direction or in different direction, but the vectors are parallel to each other, they are said to be the parallel vectors. So like this, the vector which are parallel to each other, they are said to be the parallel vectors. Unparallel or anti-parallel vectors, the vectors which are different direction, they are not parallel to each other. Suppose the vectors may be like this. So like this, vectors are anti-parallel vectors. Unparallel vectors. Okay, so we can say here this direction is in the same direction. Parallel vectors means they are parallel to each other. The vector which are parallel to each other, they are said to be the parallel vectors. Here anti-parallel means the vector is like this. It is both are in different directions there. Okay, So they are said to be the anti-parallel vectors there. So next one is a unit vector. Unit vector. So unit vector is nothing but the vector which has its magnitude is equals to 1. Means the vector which has the magnitude of the vector is equal to 1, then that vector is said to be the unit vector. Here the unit vector can be represented by, suppose A bar is a vector, A bar is a vector, then the unit vector of that vector can be represented by A cap. So now that representation we are going to see here, the representation of vectors or denotion of the vectors, there we are going to see the formula of this unit vector can be given as here A bar by modulus of A bar here. So this is a formula for the unit vector. Here this A bar is a vector, so vector can be represented by this, like suppose it may be the velocity or force or acceleration. So velocity is represented by V, then V overheaded by an arrow, then that is said to be the velocity. If there is no overheaded by an arrow, then that can be the speed, it may be the speed there. Like that, a vector can be represented by an alphabet overheaded by an arrow is said to be, it is the vector. Then if it is a unit vector, the vector overheaded by a cap. So that is the representation of vectors there. And here modulus of A bar is there. So this will be the magnitude. So this is the magnitude there. Magnitude of the vectors means magnitude is nothing but the measurement of the numerical value. The value of the vector in its numerical value and its unit, that is called the magnitude there. So that magnitude can be represented by here modulus of A bar, modulus of A bar there. And negative vector, the vector which is in equal in magnitude and opposite direction there. Suppose if it is considered this A bar vector and this will be the B bar vector. So the vector which has an equal in magnitude, the vector which has equal in magnitude but opposite in direction is said to be the negative vector. Proper vector is nothing but the vector which has its magnitude is not equal to 0, means it has certain value. The magnitude may not be equal to 0. It has certain value there. If the magnitude is 0 means that is the null vector. If the magnitude is not equal to 0 means it will have the proper magnitude. That vector is called the proper vector. Okay. So now next one is a position vector. Position vector is nothing but the vector which starts from the origin and ends in a plane. So this vector is called the position vector. The vector which starts at the origin and ends in a plane at any point in a plane there. So that vector is called position vector. And equal vector is nothing but the vector which has equal in magnitude and in the same direction. The vector which has same magnitude and same direction is said to be the equal vector. The vector which has the vectors which are same in magnitude and direction are said to be the equal vectors there. Collinear vectors means the vector which are lie in the straight line path. So those vectors are said to be the collinear vectors. We can write here A bar, B bar and C bar we can write here. The vector which are all lie in the same plane. So like here we can write here AB bar and AC bar, like this we can write here BC bar vectors. Okay. So otherwise we can write here A bar plus B bar plus C bar, A bar plus B bar plus C bar. So that is, they are the collinear vectors. The vectors which are lie in a straight line path are said to be the collinear vectors. And second one is coplanar vectors. The vectors which are lie in the same plane are said to be the coplanar vectors there. Suppose here one plane is there here like this, and here another plane is there. So the vector which are lie in the same plane, they are said to be the coplanar vector. This is another plane and this is the same plane there. Okay, they are said to be the coplanar vectors there. And null vector. So null vector is nothing but the vector which has its magnitude is equal to 0. The vector which has its magnitude is equals to 0 is said to be the null vectors. Then magnitude can be represented by like this, no, modulus of A bar is equal to 0. So this is called the null vector. And orthogonal vector is nothing but the vectors which has 90 degrees angle with between them. Okay, the vectors which are the angle between the two vectors, if it is 90 degrees, then they are said to be the orthogonal vectors there. So like that, and we have one dimensional vectors, random vectors like that. Okay, so these are the different types of the vectors. Okay, so like vectors, unlike vector, parallel vectors. Okay, sometimes here we can see parallel vectors are like vectors, we can say that. Okay, so anti-parallel or unparallel vectors. Okay, they are not parallel to each other. Okay, so then so sometimes we can say parallel vectors and like vectors are same, unlike vectors and unparallel vectors, maybe we can say they're same there. Okay, so unit vector is nothing but the vector which has its magnitude is equals to 1, and negative vector is nothing but the vector which has an equal magnitude but it opposite in direction is said to be the negative vector. Proper vector, the vector which its magnitude is not equal to 0, means it has the proper magnitude is said to be the proper vector. Position vector is nothing but the vector which is starts at the origin and ends in a point in a plane at any point is said to be the position vector. Equal vector is nothing but the vector which has equal in magnitude and in the same direction there. There is said to be the equal vectors. Collinear means the vector which are in the same line, straight line path, along the straight line path are said to be the collinear vectors. Coplanar vectors are nothing but the vectors which are in a same plane are said to be the coplanar vectors. Here these four vectors are in the coplanars and that is in their other two vectors are in another plane, so they are to be the they are not said to be the coplanar. Only these four vectors are said to be the coplanar. So the vector which are in the which lie in the same plane are said to be the coplanar vectors. Null vectors. Null vector is nothing but the vector which has its magnitude is equals to 0, then it is said to be the null vectors. Orthogonal vectors. Orthogonal vector is nothing but the angle between the two vectors is 90 degrees, then the vectors are said to be the orthogonal vectors there. These are the some of the types of vectors.